ذلك عيسى ابن مريم قول الحق الذي فيه يمترون.
First, the historical evidence. Did Jesus die by crucifixion? It is the unanimous written testimony concerning what happened to Jesus.
Even the most skeptical scholars agree that one of the most certain events in all of history is the fact that Jesus of Nazareth died on a Roman cross under the orders of Pontius Pilate, beginning of the 4th decade of the 1st century.
When scholars say that Hazrat Isa died on the cross, it's not just because they say the Injil says so. Yes, the Injil does say it by 5 different authors. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Paul all say that Jesus died on the cross. But you also have non-Christian authors who are writing in early times, 1st century Jerusalem, who say that Jesus died on the cross. The Talmud, the Jewish writings, that says Jesus died on the cross. Tacitus, the Roman historian, Josephus, the Roman historian, they both say Jesus died on the cross. Lucian of Samosata, Mara bar Serapion, these are people who have nothing to do with Christianity directly, yet they all affirm that Jesus died on the cross. So not only do we have Christian sources that say Hazrat Isa died on the cross, and not only do we have non-Christian sources that say he died on the cross, we have no indication that he didn't die on the cross.
Of all the things that Islam could possibly deny, it denies the one fact we know about Jesus that all scholars across the board, across the theological and philosophical spectrum acknowledge is absolutely beyond question. The Quran denies a fact of history, which is multiply, independently attested by early sources, by both Christian and secular sources, and fulfills the criterion of embarrassment. There's so many different historical criteria and sources that are bearing on the crucifixion of Jesus. Some of the Gnostic sources denied Jesus' death by crucifixion because they didn't believe that Jesus had a fully physical body, and you can't crucify a phantom.
There's a book that they found at Nag Hammadi. It's called the second treatise of the Great Seth, that's what they called it, the second treatise of the Great Seth, which states very clearly that a man named Simon was crucified instead of Jesus, very clearly. And there was a large group of Christians in the 1st century called the Basilidians, who denied that Isa a.s. was crucified. Right? Who is Simon? So if you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke in the New Testament, it says that when they were going to crucify Jesus, the Romans pulled a man out of the crowd named Simon, and they compelled him to bear the cross. Many Christians in the 1st century believed this man was crucified instead of Jesus. So in the Gospel of John, the last of the 4 Gospels in the New Testament, which is written around 100 of the Common Era, John says very clearly Jesus bore his own cross. He doesn't even mention that episode of Simon, because he knows at his time there were Christians who categorically denied that Isa a.s. was crucified.
You! Help him carry the cross!
We have no indication that he didn't die on the cross. We have no indication that he didn't die on the cross.
For most contemporary Christians, indeed for most inhabitants of the Western world, it's almost unthinkable that anyone could seriously maintain that Jesus was not crucified. Such critics of Islam might even maintain that the alleged resurrection of Jesus is a matter of religious belief. But the crucifixion of Jesus is a matter of an unblemished historical record.
Is absolutely beyond question.
One of the most certain events in all of history.
It is the unanimous written testimony.
However, as we shall soon see, the actual historical record is otherwise than we might expect. Outside of the New Testament and other early Jewish and Christian scriptural writings, there are only 2 references to Jesus being crucified in the entire historical record of the 1st and early 2nd centuries. The first was made by Josephus ben Matthias, a 1st century Jewish historian, and the second by Tacitus, a 1st and 2nd century Roman. Neither writer was present at the crucifixion event. For that matter, most biblical scholars maintain that none of the New Testament authors who wrote about the crucifixion event were actual witnesses to that event.
As I studied more and more using my intelligence, I became convinced that the New Testament Gospels were not written by eyewitnesses or by people who knew eyewitnesses.
In short, the discrepancy about the crucifixion event between Islam and contemporary Christianity obscures the fact that many branches of early Christianity maintain quite adamantly that it was not Jesus Christ who was crucified. This can be verified by examining the writings of the so-called Apostolic Fathers of the early Christian churches, the so-called New Testament Apocrypha, and even the New Testament itself. The writings of the Apostolic Fathers frequently noted that there were Christian sects that rejected the proposition that Jesus had been crucified. Such references can be found in the writings of Ignatius, Polycarp, Justin, Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Hippolytus. Together, these Apostolic Fathers represent a veritable who's who of early Christianity. As a specific example, we can turn to the Trallians, a book authored by Ignatius, the Bishop of Antioch, who died around the year 110. In referring to the crucifixion event, Ignatius wrote that there were Christians of his day who denied that Jesus was crucified in reality, but was crucified only in appearance or in illusion. In considering this statement from Ignatius, one must acknowledge that he could not be attacking a belief among Christians that did not, in fact, exist. His attack against those early Christians who believed that Jesus' crucifixion was only illusory demonstrates the existence of that belief among Christians at least as early as 110, the date of Ignatius' death. Further, the fact that Ignatius even bothered to attack this doctrine suggests that that belief was quite widespread by at least 110. The fact that many branches of early Christianity maintain that it was not Jesus Christ who was crucified can also be readily verified by considering the so-called New Testament Apocrypha. For example, the Apocalypse of Peter 81 through 82 maintained that Jesus was crucified only in appearance, not in reality, with the one who was crucified being a substitute or simulacrum of Jesus. Likewise, the second treatise of the great Seth, 55 through 56, stated it was not Jesus who was crucified, but Simon, presumably Simon of Cyrene, who is identified in the biblical Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke as being the person who carried Christ's cross forth. This position that it was Simon of Cyrene who was crucified in place of Jesus was a cardinal tenet of that early Christian group known as Basilidians, which flourished in Egypt during the 2nd century and which claimed to have received its message directly from Glaucus, the translator of Peter, one of the 12 disciples. Additionally, the Acts of John 97 through 101 reported that the crucifixion of Jesus was an illusion. However, it is not just within the so-called apocryphal writings that one finds evidence that it was not Jesus who was crucified. The biblical Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, verses 11 through 26, tell us about Jesus being before Pontius Pilate.
So this name, Yeshua, it also has the ood. It's called Shurek in Hebrew. His name literally means the one saved by God. That's what his name literally means. Psalms 26. All right. This is what it says. It says, I know that God will save his Messiah. God will save his Messiah. He shall hear him from his holy heaven with the saving power of his right hand. Right? So this idea that Isa, that the Messiah wasn't crucified, this is not a Muslim invention. This has precedent in prophecy in the Old Testament.
وقولهم إنا قتلنا المسيح عيسى ابن مريم رسول الله وما قتلوه وما صلبوه ولكن شبه لهم وإن الذين اختلفوا فيه لفي شك منه ما لهم به من علم إلا اتباع الظن وما قتلوه